Welcome back to the kitchen. Today we have a really delicious and super beautiful Easter breakfast bread. If you're looking for something to serve on Easter morning, you're definitely going to want to stick around and watch this video, and you're going to think, wow, that's so beautiful, and it really is so easy to make. So what we're going to make is we're going to make a sweet dough. It's not overly sweet. It's got some sugar and real butter, and it's just, you know, a nice sweet dough. We're going to roll it into a rectangle. We're going to put some ground almonds and cinnamon, roll it up, and form it in a circle so it looks like a wreath. And then you're going to slash the sides and turn them just a little bit so you can see the filling in each one of those where you've cut it. And it's just going to make a beautiful wreath. And then we're going to drizzle it with a light almond frosting, and it is so delicious, and it really is super easy to make once you watch someone make it. And you probably already have all the ingredients in your pantry, so it's not something you have to plan ahead to do. So let's head into the kitchen and we're going to make it together. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our milk into a large bowl. Now I am not going to make this in my KitchenAid or my Bosch because I want to make this recipe to where anybody can make it. If you don't have anything fancy for making bread, you've never made dough, we're just going to do it the really basic way in a bowl. Now if you have a Bosch or you have a KitchenAid and you want to use that for this dough, go right ahead. I'm not going to explain that because if you have one of those, I assume that you are already making bread and you know what to do. So we're just going to do it in a bowl. Now my liquid for the dough, a lot of times I use warm water, but in this recipe we're going to use milk. And I have heated this milk up, and I have cooled it just a little bit because it got up a little too high. Dan, I usually like my liquid to be anywhere from 105 to 115, somewhere in that range. Now I have this digital meat thermometer that I love to use when I'm making bread. A lot of people just feel it and they just instinctively know, but I'm just more exact. I like to make sure, so I put it in there and I read the readout, and my milk was right at 114. So if it was higher than 115, I would let it cool down. So that is ready, and now we're just going to add our active dry yeast, and this is dehydrated yeast. We're going to put it in this warm milk to wake it up. And then I'm going to add, I've already pre-measured my sugar, so I'm just going to add about a tablespoon of sugar, of the pre-measured sugar, a little bit more in there, because that sugar is going to be food to the yeast as it's waking up, and it will become very, very bubbly and active, and it will rise our dough really, really well. So I just put that milk in there, I add the yeast, a little bit of sugar, whisk it around, and then I don't leave it on my counter because a lot of people have granite countertops which tend to be more cold, and the yeast just does so much better if everything's warm. So I will usually set it on my stovetop because a lot of times I'm either heating the water or the milk, so the stovetop is already kind of warm. So I'll just set it there, and this yeast could take anywhere from 10 to 20, 30 minutes to become active, just depending on the yeast and depending on the temperature of the day. So we will know that this is ready when it becomes really, really bubbly and active. So when it is ready, I will turn the camera down into it so you can see what active yeast that has come back to life or woken up and is ready to rise your dough. I'll show you what that looks like. As you can see, this liquid, it doesn't have any bubbling going on at all. It's just a smooth surface, not a lot of action right now. So this is what it looks like in the beginning. And now we're just going to let it become active and, woken up from its dehydrated state. Okay. Our yeast is ready to go. As you can see, this has really gotten bubbly and risen up. It's probably risen up about an inch. So this yeast is ready to be put into use. Now for those of you that may be new to baking your own bread or making dough for any of the bread products, I just want to take a moment to just kind of explain really quick the science behind activated yeast. You may have heard about yeast and not really known much about it. So the yeast, it's a living organism, and it is when you put that in with flour and all your ingredients, that it it is what's causing the dough to rise and become, you know, more than just a lump of dough. It rises and becomes filled with all the air bubbles, and it makes it light and fluffy. But the active dry yeast is when they take that yeast and they dehydrate it, and they basically put it into dormancy. And you can buy it in a dry powder form. This is active, but it's basically like saying it's asleep. It's not doing anything. So we need to wake it up. And so the best things to wake it up is what it loves is it loves a warm, moist environment, and it likes sugar for food. And so if you put it in the perfect temperature, just let it sit there, it will start to wake up. And then if you add that sugar in, it can eat it, and it becomes super robust. It becomes awake, and it's ready to do its job. Now, if you just let it sit here for a super long time, if I just let this sit here for like an hour, it's going to get kind of sleepy again, and it's just going to go to sleep. So if you want to catch it while it's awake and it's had its sugar and its food and it's ready to go. And so this is when you want to use it, because this is when it's going to rise your bread and it's going to do its thing. So we don't want to leave this just sitting here. We left it long enough to get it woken up, but now we want to catch it while it's at its strongest state. So that kind of, if you've never really understood about active dry yeast, it is active, but it's dry and in a dormant state, and we need to wake it up. So just a little bit of science behind it. So maybe when you're working with stuff, you can look at it and say, oh, that makes sense. This is very active. It's time to use it. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to add my fat into here. So we've got butter today. A lot of times, you know, I use oil or different kinds of fats, and so today it's going to be butter because we want that buttery sort of dough. We're going to add the rest of our sugar. We already added part of it when we were waking the yeast up. We're going to add an egg, which I want to beat it. Forgot to do that. So we'll add that in there. And then I like, before I add the salt, I like to put a little layer of flour in there. Doesn't just maybe like a half a cup. And then I lay my salt just to not put it right on the yeast. Sometimes it affects the yeast. All right, so I'm going to give this a stir. Now, a lot of recipes will give you an exact amount of flour, and it really, you don't know. It all depends on the humidity, your altitude, just a lot plays into how much flour you need. So on some days you need more flour than on other days. So what I like to do is in the beginning I add a half of a cup at a time. So I will just mix it, and right now it's very, very thin, very watery. And so I know, you know, I'm a bit away from getting it the way that I want it. So I'm just going to keep adding flour in a half a cup at a time until it starts forming a ball. A really shaggy, moist, like you could never knead it. Put it on the counter, knead it with your hands. It's just be very moist. And then once it gets to that point where it is starting to form a ball, I'll start putting less and less flour, maybe a fourth of a cup and then an eighth of a cup, because I don't want to put too much. I'm just going to read my dough, which I'll show you how to do that. I'm just going to read it, and once I can tell that it has enough flour, then I'm going to stop. So there isn't a set amount. It's generally about 4 cups, but it could vary between 4 to 6 cups. So the printable recipe will give a general amount, but you need to read the dough. All right, so as you can see, this is just a very, wet, it's more like a really thin pancake. So I know that we're gonna have to add quite a bit of flour to get this to a workable dough. So I'll add a half a cup at a time, and we'll just keep doing that, and you'll see it start taking shape. you can see, it is starting to, you know, come together. That's still a very wet, moist, like you could never do anything with this with your hands. But it just is letting me know to maybe not add as much flour at one time, because if you put too much flour, you're going to have a really dry dough. It's not going to be that nice, moist dough that you're looking for. So you just want to be careful to not overdo it. I'd rather take it slow and steady. So that's coming together nice, but it's still too wet. So I'm going to add, I'm down to maybe 1/4 of a cup. And it really is amazing how you could have a really dry day and you'll find that it calls for one amount of flour, and then you could have a really humid day and it calls for a completely different amount. That's why I don't really like to follow directions when they give me an exact amount of flour to use, because it's not accurate. See, I'm really reducing the amount of flour because this is almost getting too hard to mix with a spoon. I'm gonna have to stick my hands in there and start doing this with my hands in a minute. Yeah, that's forming a really nice, and it's starting to clean the sides of the bowl. All right, so I am gonna clean off the spoon and we're just gonna put our hands in there. Then I can really feel when it gets to the point that I need it to. Now I can tell that it's still real sticky, like it's sticking to me. So to turn this out onto the counter and start kneading it, it would be a little bit of a mess, but I'm not going to add more than just maybe 1/8 of a cup is about, or even less. Just, it really is almost there. That's probably the amount that I would add. All right, that's starting to feel really, really nice. And you can tell it's not sticking to me like it was. Like my hands are pretty clean. So I'm going to clean the sides of this bowl because I am going to use this bowl when I'm done and I'm letting it rise. No need to dirty another bowl. We'll just use this one. So I'm going to use the dough to just kind of mop everything up. See how perfectly clean that is? So I'm just going to set that aside and we're going to turn it out onto the counter and begin to knead it. You can just tell how nice that dough is. See, it's not sticking at all. So as I knead it, it's going to soak up the flour, and the liquid in this dough is going to, you know, really soak up that flour. And so this dough may become sticky, a little bit sticky. So if you need to, you can just do maybe this, just put a little bit on the counter, not much, and just roll it in it, and then it'll be workable again. So I'm going to knead this dough just like this, whatever, however you want to do it. Everybody has their own style. And the way that I'm going to know that this is done and I can stop kneading it is by something I call the Windowpane Test. And a lot of recipes, most recipes will tell you to knead it for 8 to 10 minutes or knead it till it's smooth and elastic, and that's just kind of broad. I mean, it's very vague, and it's really hard to know, and there really is a science behind it. When you knead it, if you take and you break off a ball of dough and you roll it up and you start to stretch it, like, you know, don't pull on it, but just work it. If you can get this to stretch, and if you hold it up to a light, and if you can start to see the light shining through the dough and the dough has not torn, then it's ready. If you notice this, I'm barely stretching it, and it is oh, see there, it's starting to tear. So I could not pull this very wide before it started to tear. So the gluten is not developed at all because I just started. So what you're doing when you're kneading the dough is you're developing the gluten, and it's getting it to where the gluten will be able to, you know, rise your dough and give you nice fluffy dough, bread. And so we have to just knead it until it gets to that point. So just knead it like this, and then every once in a while pull off a hunk of dough and do that test to it. Carefully try to stretch it. I mean, you can't just pull on it because, you know, it will tear. But if you slowly, you know, if you very gently just work it, and then you kind of pull it, you know, gently like that, and you hold it up to a light. If you can see it's starting to tear. If you can see the light through it before it tears, then you stop. Don't do it anymore. Don't overwork it. But if it doesn't and it tears, then just keep kneading. So it could take, I mean, I've had it develop in, you know, 7-8 minutes, and then there's been other times that I've kneaded it for 15. It all depends on the, you know, the external, like what I was saying about elevation or humidity, or a lot plays into it. Alright, so this dough is perfect. I wish you guys could feel it. It is so soft, and it is just going to make the most amazing bread. So what we're going to do now is it's time for it to rise. So I have a little bit of butter set aside, and I'm going to just rub it all in the inside of this bowl. No need to have cleaned it. We're just going to plop the dough right back into it. A little bit of dough there. And I'm just going to brush it so it doesn't stick. And I'm going to take the dough and I'm going to plop it in. And then I'm going to turn it so now the top will be nicely greased. Put it right back in there. And we're going to cover this up and we're going to let it rise. Now, a lot of times if you are to look at a recipe, some sort of bread dough recipe, they're going to tell you let it rise for an hour, let it rise until it's doubled in size. And that's really vague too. It's really hard to know. Because this bowl, for one thing, it's narrow at the bottom, it's wider at the top. So what's double in size? It's not halfway up the bowl, because that's not double in size. And you know, an hour, sometimes I've had bread rise on a really warm day and it's taken about 30 minutes. Sometimes on a cooler day it's taken up to an hour and a half for it to double in size. And so to really know how to make sure that your bread has risen enough, because you don't want it to over rise. If it rises for too long, that yeast is going to go back to sleep and it's going to not do what you want it to do. But if it hasn't risen enough, you're going to have more of a tough dough. So what is that perfect rise time? So what you're going to do is when it looks like it's about doubled in size and it looks like it's about ready, you can eyeball it. Just take your two fingers and just poke into it, and it's going to make two indentions. And when you pull your fingers out, if those holes start to fill up quickly and, you know, pop back out, it is not ready. But if the holes stay in, they're going to bounce back a little bit. But if you look back after a minute and those indentation marks are still deeply in there, it's ready. It's done. You're ready to move on to the next step. So today is just a nice cool spring day, so it's probably going to take about an hour. But if you're doing this in the summertime, it's, you know, could be 30 minutes. So anyway, we're going to let this rise and then we're going to form it into a beautiful wreath. While we're waiting for our dough to rise, we're going to go ahead and prepare our almonds. So I have a bowl of raw whole almonds. If you don't want to chop these, you could get the slivered almonds and use that instead, but I like the ground almonds in here. So I am going to grind these in my blender. I have a Vitamix and you can do it really quick in there. So I'm going to go ahead and grind these and set them aside so that when we, you know, start doing our dough and we roll it out and put the butter on it, I'll have the almonds ready to go. Alright, so they're just about done. I'm going to shake it up a little bit and do it for another couple seconds. See how fast that was? So as you can see, this is it's a coarse, very coarse grind, but it's not flour. It still is chunky, but I really like this because you can just press it right into the dough and It's not sliced or big chunks. It's just a nice layer of almonds that you can put on your dough. Our dough has risen. It is definitely doubled in size. I did the poke test and it did real well, and so it is ready to move on to the next step. I just spun this bowl around and I'm going to show you guys at the poke test again. So I stuck 2 fingers in, and as you can see, let's see, let me get this in the camera. As you can see, those finger marks right there, they are not bouncing back at all. They are staying indented. So that means your dough is ready. When it isn't ready, those holes would have filled in by now, and you know, you would know it's not ready because of that. So I'm going to punch this dough down and deflate it, and now we're going to roll it out. We're going to want to turn this dough onto your countertop, and we're going to roll it into a rectangle, and the size is about roughly 12 by 18. Now, something like this, because I do want it to be easier when I'm doing the wreath, and I don't want the wreath to be too big. When it says 12 to 18, I actually do measure it because I just want it to be that perfect size. So I'm going to kind of start by forming it into somewhat of a rectangle, just so that when I start rolling it, it's not like in a weird shape or something. So that's a good start right there. And now I'm just going to start rolling this out. And I usually go this way until I've got that 18 inches. So it's 18 inches long and 12 inches going this way. So I've still got several inches. All right. We're getting close. That's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I'm right at 18 inches. So now I'll start rolling it this way to be, you know, 12. Now I can see right here that it's actually really thin, so I'm going to press some dough. That's the only place. It was almost like I was seeing the counter right there, so I just want to put a little bit of dough that way. So this was right at just about 18, so I'm going to try to even it out and make it look more like a rectangle. This is a little taller than this is over here, so I'm just going to try and move the dough around with my rolling pin to make it as even as possible. The edges are a little fatter than the center, so I'm going to try and roll some of that dough back into the center. And now I'm going to get try and form it up into a rectangle. I'm going to get my ruler again and just see where we're at. So we are right at 12 inches this way. And let's see, that's 12. Yep, it's just about 18.5 inches. So this is the exact size, and now I'm going to make it into a perfect rectangle. This dough is really easy to work with. It doesn't, I have a lot of dough, had dough before when it springs back and it's hard to keep it in a, you know, the shape that you want it in, but this just stays so perfectly. So there, that is a perfect rectangle. So now we're going to spread softened butter. I've had butter sitting out all morning, and I'm going to just put a thick layer of butter all over this. I love to use one of these. These are just like a frosting knife, I guess is what you'd call it. I am going to link this in my blog. If you want the printable recipe for this Easter wreath, then click the link below and it'll take you to my blog where you can get the printable recipe and all the information that you would need to know about making this. I'll have all the tools linked, so it'll be really easy for you to find whatever you need. So I will link this as well on my blog. So you'll find that in the link below. So I just put a nice thick layer. I just, you know, softened a cube, like a 1/2 cup cube stick, and I don't know if I'll use the whole thing, but I know I won't need more than a stick of butter. So I always just defrost it or soften it and use what I need. All right, that looks good. Now that the butter's on there, we're gonna put a nice layer of cinnamon. I really like to be liberal with the amount of cinnamon I use. All right, now for the almonds, the ground almonds. I'm gonna kind of press it down into there. We're ready to roll this up. So I'm gonna start from this back edge and I'm just gonna roll it, you know, going like jelly roll style, just like you would do cinnamon rolls. This is such amazing dough to work with. It just you know, you can just work with it so easily. Now when you get to the edges, I just take this and I just kind of pull it so that this can roll, so it's real even on this end. And then I just pick this up and bring it and I just pinch it up. So the same on this side. I'll take this and I'll pull it so this is more of a straight line. The ends always tend to get more narrow, so I'll just kind of push it a little bit that way. All right, now I'm going to kind of clean this off because we're going to set our cookie sheet right here. Now I've got a large cookie sheet and I love these pieces of parchment paper. I buy these, I buy a box. I think it holds like 200, 250 of these pre-cut parchment papers. They just fit right into your cookie sheet, so I really like that. So I'm going to pick this up and I'm just going to transfer it onto this cookie sheet, and then we are going to form it into a wreath. So I'm going to want this, the seam side needs to be down. I'm going to try and turn it. There we go. Just gonna have to work with it and get it into, I want to get the seam side down. So as you can see, I just kind of worked with it until and you can tell this is a little fatter than it is over here. So you can kind of just work with it. The dough is just so pliable, you can really just press it and pull on it. Now, I'm trying to decide if I've seen this done two different, or I've always done it this way, but then I've seen it done another way where you actually don't join them, you just do this. So you can kind of see the cut in, so it's really up to you how you want the finished product. If you want it more not connected, I think I'll probably do it like this, where it's not fully connected at the end. Just kind of smoothing it out because this will be the finished product. If there's a bunch of dents in it, then you'll see that. Wow, that's going to be beautiful when it's finished. All right, so the last part that we're going to do is we're going to slice this at about, I'm guessing about 1.5 inch intervals all the way around. And it's probably not going to end at exactly 1.5 inches. So once you get to about here, just kind of start eyeballing it to try and even it out as you go. So I'm going to actually take my ruler And I'm just going to mark so I kind of know. So I'm not trying to guess. And then I can kind of see if it's going to, you know, end up perfectly at the end, or if I'm going to have to kind of readjust as I go. Okay, so this ends at about, it left me with 2 inches. So about here I'll start kind of just adding a little bit to these slices so it evens out. So what you're going to do is you're not going to cut all the way through. You're going to cut about 2/3 to about right here. So you're going to have to be really careful. Don't just chop it, because it'll very much mess up the shape of your dough. And if you would like, you could do this with a pair of scissors. Maybe I'll grab a pair of scissors and I can show you that way too. But if you do it with a knife, you definitely want to use a serrated knife. You don't want to use just a straight edge. So after you cut it, you're going to turn it just a little bit, so it opens up. Let me grab a pair of scissors and we'll see what's easier. I've done it both ways. It actually might be easier with scissors. So you're just going to want to chop it, but leave about 1/3 of it, and each time you're going to just turn it. And you can just kind of shape it if it gets distorted at all, like this as I was cutting it. So I'm just going to kind of press it. The thing with scissors is it does kind of, if you notice, it does kind of distort it on the ends right here. But you can always just press it with your hands. You actually might find it easier doing it with scissors and then just, let's see, then just pressing it and reshaping it each time. Look how beautiful that is. And it's nice that I marked them beforehand so I know exactly where to go. Now when you serve this, people will just naturally cut off a piece. It'll naturally just tell them exactly what a serving size is. And then just press that back in where you cut it with the scissors. You can kind of push this out just a little bit. So as you can see, this is very much just working with it. But you're going to find that this dough is so enjoyable to work with. It is probably one of the easiest dough recipes. So you know, this naturally just kind of comes together at the end. It just it finishes off really nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of go in the center and just get that perfect circle and kind of just make it perfect on the outside. On this finished one right here, that was the very end. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a little bit of butter in there. I'm going to put a little bit of this stuff that was left on the counter. so it doesn't look quite like the end of it. So look at that. That is so beautiful. And this is going to rise and get just a little bigger. And then we're going to bake it, and we're going to drizzle it with icing, with an almond, a light almond icing. All right, so just put a towel over this and set it aside, and let it rise just a bit. It's been rising for about 40 minutes, and look at this. It looks amazing. That is going to be so beautiful once it's cooked. So I have been preheating the oven while I was waiting, and I'm going to go pop it in there and bake it for about 20-25 minutes. While the wreath is baking, we're going to go ahead and make the icing. It's just going to be a real thin icing, and I'm going to put the almond extract into the powdered sugar first, because I'm going to be adding the milk until it gets the desired consistency. So I want to already have the almond extract in there, because that is a liquid, and so it has the full amount. And so now I'm just going to be adding just a little bit at a time. You're just going to want to pour this in and whisk it together until it is the consistency that you want it. You don't want to be too thin, but you want it to be pourable so that you can pour it over the top. What I have in here is I have half and half, and I added a little bit of whipping cream to it, and it's just going to make it a real rich, nice icing. I can just smell the almond extract. It smells so delicious. But do you see how this just kind of lightly pours off of my whisk? This is about how you want it, so that you can just ice it, just drizzle the icing over the top of the wreath. See, I'll show you. See how nice that is? You can just drizzle it. All right, it's been baking for about 25 minutes. And are you guys ready for this? This is gorgeous. Look at this. Now we're just going to put that glaze all over the top, and it is finished. Now the way that I know that this is done baking, I always love to use my digital thermometer, and I'll stick it into a spot where you're not really going to see that I did it, like down into one of these areas, and I'll push it in so it's right in the center, and I'll measure the temperature, the degrees, and at 200, 195 to 200, it's done. So this reached just at 200, so I knew to pull it. So now we're going to drizzle the glaze all over the top, and it is going to be amazing. Well, there's something so satisfying about knowing that you made that, when you pull that out of the oven and you serve it to your company, it is just so fun to know that you tackled that project and that you did it. And if you've never baked something, baked goods or something, more intricate like this, I'd love if you'd give it a try. Just try it one time and you will get hooked on the feeling of baking beautiful bread like this. It's not that hard. If you just follow, the instructions, and you've got a tutorial, you can click the link below for my printable recipe, and the blog will have all kinds of information for you. So you're really set up for success. So this Easter, why don't you go ahead and make one of these and set it on the table, and all of your company will probably think you picked it up at a coffee shop until you tell them that you actually made it, and that is such a fun feeling. So if you enjoyed this, I would love it if you would give me a thumbs up, and go ahead and subscribe and click that little bell so that you'll be notified every time I post. I bring a lot of content to my channel, a lot of delicious food, different techniques and tricks and tips, and so you're not going to want to miss anything. So go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.